Yeah, by the end of this episode, you'll have a full beard again. So,
I will, yeah. Today it was too much, so I was like, okay, I gotta take this off. But yeah, by Tuesday it'll just be the regular amount. It'll be the one trim, and then that'll be the last episode we record before I head off to the land of not magic carpets. That's Arabic. Spices? Me?
yeah, just
Yeah,
you. Yeah, the homeland.
yeah. The land of me. Yeah. Cool. Welcome everyone to another great episode of the Do Better Dev Show. I'm here with your only co-host, Nathan Calvin.
That's me. What does that make you?
I'm just a shadow. I'm like a figure on the wall, fly on the wall. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm here to just make everything. I don't know. Just add to your excellence.
Okay.
That's what I'm really here for.
Wow. Huh. Weird that I can be the only person who's the co-host without a second one, but all right. Do what I can. I'll try to hold up that half of the deal.
That's what you do. You're the. This is a show about oxymorons
Mm,
because there's already one
right. All right. Well,
besides the oxy. Yeah.
all right. Well, in that case, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
Good.
2021 is going great. January is about to end. By the time people listen to this, it'll probably be March.
Yeah, I
Um,
think probably the last week of March.
Probably, yeah. So just running a little time zone behind, I guess, time date zone behind. But yeah, I'm doing great. How about you?
Yeah, it's been good. The only thing I have to complain about really is just that as soon as the weather gets close to zero in Victoria, this is my pet peeve, my annual pet peeve. The city decides it's time to start pouring buckets of salt everywhere. So I step outside my door and there are literal piles of salt. And normally I'm exaggerating and I just mean like 20 times the amount of salt you need. But no, there's an actual like pile of salt just sitting outside my door. And next to it, about 2 feet over, is another one. And then 2 feet from that is another one. So it's a strange thing for a city that knows nothing about winter to just
Mm.
pour these piles of salt everywhere. But other than that, despite the fact that there's salt, there's no real winter outside. So it's been lovely. Enjoying that. Days are getting longer, as you mentioned, end of January. And probably going to go back and do some climbing starting in February. So that'll be good. So yeah, lots of good stuff.
Sounds like someone has just access to free salt and is not using it.
I'm not sure that there's anything I want to do with that salt.
Mm.
Um,
If you throw it at somebody, is do you get charged for assault?
Again, I specifically asked not to tell bad jokes that I don't know how to respond to. All right. Well, no, I don't.
Okay,
I don't know what the rules are. Try
okay,
not to assault people.
okay. That's good because that's good. Yeah. In some cultures, it's frowned upon.
Yes. Yeah. Canada being generally a friendly nation, you shouldn't assault people.
Maybe they'll just apologize to you. They'll just be like, sorry.
Yeah, it's amazing how often you can totally be the one that's in somebody else's way, and then both people apologize. It never ceases to amaze me ever since spending some time in the States and just that difference where they'll look at you and they're like, why are you in the way? And you go, oh, I'm sorry. But in Canada, you're clearly in the way, and both people are just like, oh, sorry. So,
Yeah, and you just in states you just have to assert your dominance
right.
because it's a similar culture in India where if you run into someone's way, either they're just too busy to give a crap, so they'll just walk away, or they get annoyed and they're like, "Why are you in my way?" So you just have to be the bigger guy and be like, "Well, why are you in my way?"
Mm.
And you keep doing that until one of you like realizes it's pointless and then you walk away, or you're just like, okay, watch out from next time or something,
Wow.
like you're gonna see that guy again for whatever reason.
Huh.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm glad I don't have to put up with that because my Canadian sensibilities would do horribly there.
that's true,
My tragically
but that's why you
Canadian
work out, right?
sensibilities. Yes.
Mm.
But yeah, I guess did you have anything interesting to report on from the
Yeah,
past week?
actually a lot of cool stuff happened this
Okay,
past
great.
week
This will make up
for
for
at least for
my
tech.
this will make up for my lack of impressive things.
Oh, Well, the most interesting thing I found was Elastic changed their open source licensing for Elasticsearch and Kibana, and AWS and Elastic has apparently had this like fight for the longest time. It's like a reality TV drama in tech space that I wasn't even aware is happening until like last week, and I've been reading up on it, and it's amazing. So Elastic comes up with all of these amazing products, right? It has Elasticsearch, Kibana, and everything, and it's under the pretty sure it's either MIT or Apache license, where it's basically you can use it for commercial use. You can do whatever you want. We
Yep.
love open source.
Hmm.
So AWS comes and says, that sounds good. I will host it for my customers and I will charge them money for it. So then AWS starts making a bunch of money from this service that's free by Elastic. And now Elastic has diverged more into Elastic Cloud, where they're offering it as on their own service. But people still keep going to AWS, mostly because it's tried and tested, and there are certain distinctions between how they price storage, and AWS ends up becoming cheaper if you're storing large amounts of data. But Elastic Cloud is better if you're doing lots of processing or whatnot. Anyways, so that's happening. So Elastic is just mad, and they're like, "Hey, you're doing this. We're mad about it. So we're gonna change the license to be something like OSS or something." And so that basically restricts anybody providing it as a commercial license, and they are gonna take it in their own direction. Then AWS comes and says, "Hey, I don't like that." So they took the open source version up until the point the licensing was good and forked it.
Hmm.
And they said, "This is open source, we're allowed to do this, and now we're going to add our own features." And it was just hilarious to me because news reports were going to both sides, and AWS is just like, what we're doing is completely legal and completely okay, and we should be allowed to do this. And Elastic is sitting in their corner saying, I hope our loyal customers understand why we took the steps we took and decides to stay with us. And what I don't know if they realize is their products are used by people who have jobs and they will always prefer the low cost option. You could have a shinier thing. I'm sure Elastic Cloud is great in many aspects, but if AWS overall provides cheaper processing and everything, people are going to go there. And so you just took away open source from a whole bunch of independent developers, or people who now will have to read both licenses and understand the implications of a single product being developed by two different companies in completely two different tracks. And that part saddens me a little bit, but just the drama and reading up on it. Like, I don't watch reality TV shows, so this was great. This is everything I wanted for the whole week.
Wow.
Uh,
I can see how excited you are.
it is hilarious to me. These are like multi-million dollar companies. Amazon is billion dollar company or whatever. And they're fighting about this stuff, being like, oh no, this is my software. No, this was my software. And it was just, yeah. I got a huge kick out of it. So that was first cool tech news of the week that I really enjoyed. And then while on topic of Elasticsearch, because I've been doing a lot of that work lately, I found this GitHub repo called Elastic View, and it's Elasticsearch managing slash search client written in Vue.js, which is relevant to our talk
It
today.
sure
So
is.
yeah, and it was pretty cool because Kibana, being a very powerful tool, doesn't really give you a tabular view, and a lot of people searching through things can get a little frustrated or scared of Kibana because if you don't fully understand how it's doing what it's doing, it can, you use the dashboard and searches can be anything because it searches across every field. There's a little syntax you have to learn. So Elastic View is very straightforward. It's a search bar, you type in whatever, and it gives you everything in a tabular view, and you can go through it. And yeah, and it's also free for now, but who knows about open source anymore? I will never trust any licenses. Fork everything
Wow.
as but while you can and make it your own. NPM, I'm coming for you.
You heard it here first. Fork everything. Gyan Mishra.
Fork everything.
All right. Well, was that the last thing on your list?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so the only thing I have, it's not even related to tech. It's just I've realized that my pattern for watching YouTube videos over the last year just gradually became more and more trying to fill my life with very wholesome stuff. I think it was just a response to like lack of uh, other things to do. So I was like, you know what? If I'm not going to be working, I'd rather just watch something wholesome. And related to that, apparently, based on the comments on this video, it was one of those random ones where the YouTube algorithm just picked it up again and just started recommending it to everybody. So there's this video. It's a music video. It's a cover of all things, but it's a cover on a channel called Kurt Hugo Schneider of Counting Stars, and it's just these three people just playing a song, but it's so wholesome, and so I've been listening to that every day, a couple times, and anytime I need a little break while my code's running through the pipeline or something, just throw that on, get some good vibes, and continue with my day. So that's the only thing I have that stood out notably that I wanted to share on the show. But it's a nice one.
Are you gonna link it in the show notes
Yeah.
for everybody?
Yeah, I guess I have to.
Yeah. Wholesome video. That sounds pretty cool, actually. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's at least as good as the other
Surprised.
videos I've sent you that you haven't watched.
Exactly. I mean, I'm surprised it's not just more Lonely Island being thrown at you, or uh, forgot the last thing you sent me. Something with it had a P in it. That's all I remember.
It's not specific enough.
Hey man, you remember things, you forget things. It's Good Person featuring Rumi.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that has Lonely Island vibes, but it is not actually Lonely Island.
Okay.
So,
Alright, so
you suggested the topic for today, which is a bit surprising given the topic. So maybe
yeah.
explain what we're going to be talking about and why you wanted to discuss it.
Sure, yeah. So for anybody who skipped the title because they were just so excited to see an episode we launched and just wanted to listen to it right
Yeah,
away,
straight to the content.
we are going to be talking about the three famous front-end frameworks as it stands right now in January 2021. Angular, Vue, and React. And the reason I wanted to talk about them is because I am the front-end expert. uh, no, because I've been doing a little bit of research. There are certain apps I need to start building for the next quarter or two at my place of work, and they're going to be starting from scratch. And one of the things I could have extended was written Angular, and I hated it. So I figured, what's a better way to read through or like reiterate about what's good or bad about these three languages than to talk to the only front end expert I know. Besides Dan Abramov, he comes second, and then Nathan comes
That's
first
right.
because I can actually talk to him.
I'm sure he's very responsive on Twitter and GitHub, but I'll be more responsive on Slack and everywhere else. So
That's true. I can text you at 5 a.m. with a completely ridiculous question and get a response.
oh, that was such a false. This guy. So I had "What Does the Fox Say" stuck in my head for a few days, and I told him, and he texts me at 5 a.m. because he knows I'm up, and asks me if I can tell him what the fox says, and it was back in my head for a couple hours. So this guy's a jerk. Regardless of that, we're going to be talking about front-end frameworks.
Yes.
Just don't
It
read.
had been a couple of days, so I figured maybe it's out of your head by now,
Yeah.
so I could just put it back
Yeah,
in.
appreciate that.
But yes, I wanted to talk about the different front-end frameworks. Also, I did a lot of research, and there seems to be a lot of different articles comparing all of them because front-end is generally how people get into development, and a lot of people write about it, and then everybody gets confused. So I figured maybe from a complete beginner perspective on these things, and somebody who's used some of these frameworks more, we could like take some of that information, make it a little bit more digestible and easier to understand for anybody else going through the same thing, so they don't have to spend a bunch of time and can just listen to us and have a good life.
Nice. Good.
Yeah.
Good lives are a net positive.
They are. Agreed.
So where should we start?
I think just a little overview of the three languages, if you want to start with that.
Sure. So this is going to be there's a big disparity between my knowledge of React and then the other two. The other two I have not spent multiple years writing production applications in, so no amount of pre-show research was going to bridge that gap. But as a general principle, I've thought a bit about the differences between them, and the way I describe it is kind of like this. So they're all intended to be used for making front-end web applications that are ostensibly called single-page applications. So you do a bunch of client-side routing that allows you to navigate between what would look like different pages on a website without making a full browser reload with HTML pages. So that gets you some benefits, adds some complexity. For that reason alone, you may or may not need a front-end framework to do whatever you want to do. You might just need a static website. But if you decide you want a front-end framework, the three common ones right now are React, Angular, and Vue. So React is a very small library that is ostensibly just a runtime. And its main job is to figure out the diff of what it should produce based on the inputs and how those have changed over time. And we've happened to use that at this point to run a HTML generation system that we power with things like Webpack. So the idea behind it, and I'll add this in the show notes as well, Dan Abramov's blog has a post about how React is a runtime, and that's how they think about it. So it's very generic as far as it's designed. Something like Angular, by contrast, has the Angular way of doing something. So it is fully encompassed, like you look at a small piece of an Angular app and you see ng whatever, and you're like, oh, it's an Angular app. And it does things Angular apps can do in the Angular way. And you can't just take out like a chunk of Angular code from it, what it would use as a component, and drop it into a React app and have much hope that it's going to do something similar, because of the way that they have combined functionality and view structure in those two different ways. And then Vue is kind of in between. It has some of the templating structure that you get from something like Angular, but it looks a lot more like standard HTML and has a lot of the stuff that you would see, like I mentioned before in a previous episode, with handlebars, where you can do things like looping or whatever inside of your views. But also, the big thing that differentiates it from React is the way that it does data binding, because it has two-way data binding, and React does not. Without getting too far down the rabbit hole on any of those, I already went a bit farther than I wanted to. Those are kind of the high-level differences. You got something super generic, you've got something that's super constrained as far as like this is the way you do it, and you have something kind of in between that just takes a different approach to how to manage the state in the application.
Cool. That makes a lot of sense. So, why would I want to use one or the other?
My opinion on how you should do that is figure out what you're trying to do. So if you're trying to get a job, what you should probably do is look at job postings, see if you live in an Angular town or a React town, and then learn that one. We live in a React town. There's tons of React over here on the West Coast, and I haven't seen anybody ask me about Angular unless they're maintaining legacy systems. So it's just React. My last 3 companies have been React. I'm sure my next company will probably be React. And if not, it might be Ruby on Rails that's doing server-side view generation. And that's about it. So for me, if I were looking for job availability, it would be choosing React. If you're just doing this as a side project, you can do whichever. You could kind of just go, I guess, to the uh, Hello World documentation, look at those and see like which one do I feel best about. If there's one that's naturally intuitive to you or one that you're more naturally curious about, you could go with that because it really matters that little if you're just doing it for fun. And the other thing to consider is just their general reputation. So React tends to have a fair amount of boilerplate compared to something like Vue, but it's a bit more generalizable as far as the concepts go. Vue gets away with a lot less boilerplate, from what I've seen at least, because everything's written knowing that it's in a Vue app, not this sort of standard generic way that React and Redux and those are written. So you get to write a lot less code. And from what I've heard of anybody who likes Vue, it makes people really happy to work on Vue applications. So if that's kind of what you're going for and you're curious about Vue, it might be the one for you. I've written a couple proof of concept like job application front ends using Vue, specifically because you can kind of just type in whatever you want in their CLI and it'll just spit out that for you. So you're like, I want a TypeScript thing that does this thing and has these things plugged in. You get an app, and then you really need to change like 4 lines, and now you've got your to-do MVC that you need for your stupid job application. So it can be great for that sort of thing as well.
Cool. So now I know every job application that has given you a take-home task. You just use the CLI, change 4 lines of code.
I try, yeah, for the front end.
Okay. Can we make the clickbait title be like, make 100,000 a year by just changing 4 lines of code?
Yeah, and then I just add a CSS class that centers everything.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
With an important tag.
That's how they know that it matters.
Yes.
Like, this guy gets it.
But yeah, on the topic of like happiness, at least, I have been doing a little bit of Vue lately.
Yeah.
I did quite a bit of Angular on some of the older projects I've worked on, mostly governments, and a little bit at EA, and then the React was mostly just on startups. While I lived in Victoria, every startup breathed React. When I applied for a full stack position somewhere here in Vancouver, they still wanted to see a React app with more TypeScript than generally I've used. I've really only seen TypeScript on like Angular, never on Vue, and yeah, they wanted a TypeScript project for React, and the benefit was they were trying to share the typings between the front end and the back end, so that's why they were like, why don't you write the front end in TypeScript? So I was like, sure. It was an interview, man, and I didn't have a strong opinion either way, so I just went with it.
You can tell them to stop
But
using JavaScript on the back end, use a real language.
I did because their backend was very complicated on the fact that part of the interview question was something extremely niche about how Axios handles network calls and how you could use different tunnels or something
Right.
to make it more efficient. I was like, that you should not be dealing with those problems. That those are not problems to solve while building an application. That has nothing to do with networking. But that's what they wanted,
Yeah.
and so I was like, this is not the place for me. I'm gonna go find a different place to work.
Yeah.
Um,
I
the interview was
resisted
pretty cool
really
though.
well. If you could understand how deeply I wanted to go on a rant there, I resisted that because that's not the episode. But I really wanted to.
Yes.
Don't use the JavaScript ecosystem on the server side, guys. It's too much of a
I'm gonna
problem.
make a note to make a episode on why JS is bad in backend, and you could rant your heart out there,
Yeah,
and I will help you.
cool. Because yeah, I'll have to think about that ahead of time so I have enough content. Because right now
Yeah.
it's very very simple, but I'd still derail this
Just
episode.
don't do
quickly.
it. That's the whole episode.
Yeah,
We started
just
off
do
and
better.
said, don't do it. Yeah, do better. And then we talk about anime for an hour or something.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. Bonus episode, guys. Look out for it.
But you've been
But
using
yeah,
Vue.
it's like a Captain America post-credit scene. So you've made it this far with Vue, huh?
Sometimes it's just disappointing.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, I've been using Vue, and one of the biggest differences for me between the three languages to learn and code on was definitely the syntax. Um, Angular, everything has to have a spec file because it's all TypeScript, and it had its own. The ng prefix really bothers me. It it reminds me of one of the bad coding practices my CTO introduced me to called Smurf naming, where you put the name of the project or something that should be just understood in front of everything, like your startup name in front of the database and everything over and over. Smurf object A, Smurf object B. So when ng this and ng that, it bothered me enough to say, okay, this is little out of what I want to do.
Yeah, just in general, I think even just looking at the hello world for Angular, it's just so syntax heavy because it kind of looks like HTML, but it's also not. And that's the
Yeah.
thing that I like about its comparison to Vue, where Vue's, it just looks like HTML with attributes that are strings. And even though those strings have added functionality, you don't look at it and you go, why is there a click wrapped in parentheses equal to a string that is invoking a function? This is so strange. I wish this didn't happen, which I know is how people feel about JSX initially. But I think that at least feels so separate that it's kind of like its own thing. Whereas this is like, it's just JavaScript with HTML. Whereas this is this weird hybrid thing where where you expect there to be attributes. Instead, there's just expressions that just do stuff. Which anytime there's a lot of syntax for syntax purposes, I'm not a big fan.
That makes sense. Because why would you? I think that's one of the reasons I dislike Ruby, because it has such a drastically different syntax for me compared to every other backend language.
Uh-huh.
And it's not like it's the greatest language or anything. It's like Go has a little different syntax, but it has tons of benefits, so I put up with it. Ruby, when I go to it, I'm like I don't have to deal with this abusive relationship because I'm getting nothing out of this. I can just as easily learn programming by going towards Python, which is a lot more welcoming and doesn't hit me at night and something.
You don't have to sit there
Um,
writing if, else, unless, otherwise.
yes, yeah, or use arrow syntax. I always hated. Okay, maybe this is turning into a rant episode, so I will switch over to why I love the syntax in Vue. So yeah, so Angular, as you mentioned, its own little syntax with little spec files, and the HTML is in completely different files. So you have to sort of run it through a rendering engine of sorts. React, at first, getting used to putting HTML within my JavaScript was a little icky. Um, I the way I would like get over it was I would always just put all the HTML I want in variables above, and so I don't have to look at it while my JavaScript is all together. I understand that's not how most React that I've seen is written. There's usually HTML between the JavaScript components as you're writing them.
Yeah,
Um,
so
but
I did actually want to address that because I kind of forgot to do it in my initial explanation that I totally failed to be as specific as I wanted. But the way that modern React apps, at least that I've commonly seen, tend to solve this problem because JSX combines logic and presentation, right? So you've got your HTML next alongside your JavaScript in the same component. The way that it's separated now, it tends to be with you have all your logic at the top, and then you just return some amount, or at least if it's well structured, you just return your JSX below that. But the JSX will essentially just look like HTML, except that instead of it equaling strings, it equals variables or variables that point at functions, those kinds of things. And so you don't have typically a ton of maps and like stuff that sort of scaffolds out your UI in that section of the file. So looking at it, you're like, I see that this is going to build this component and it receives these things, and that's about it. And all the logic lives above it. And then if you have a sufficiently complex application, you can actually pull out all of that logic into what's typically called a container. And then the container holds all that logic and just loads components. And then the components hold all the display. So it kind of re-separates those things, but you get the benefit of JSX while also getting this separation of concerns from a development side. So as far as dealing with the potential frustration of having those two things combined, we've as a community sort of arrived at this is a reasonable way of keeping these things separated. So if you're not doing that, definitely search like React containers or something like that and take a look at it and see if you like it. Because my current company is the first one that I've seen do it well. And I went, oh, this, at first I was actually like, this is annoying. Why are there containers everywhere? But that was more or less subscribing to the container pattern where it wasn't needed, as opposed to recognizing this is sufficiently complex. Let's break it out into a container, at which point it's great. So highly recommend it.
Wow. So not just DevOps and front end now both are friends with containers.
That's right.
Best friends. The friendship has started.
Yes, containers everywhere.
Containers everywhere. Wow. I already love this. I might actually, I'm going to make a note, so I'm going to go check it out. And then finally on Vue, it just made me so happy.
Explain why, because I haven't done I haven't done enough with Vue to know the Vue joy.
So the way I was introduced to front-end frameworks, not like besides bare HTML, CSS that was taught to me in college, everything's in its own little file. You import it on the top in headers, you do a script tag, and that's how you run everything. The way I was actually introduced was through Flask. And in Flask, what they had was they had their HTML in its own file, and you would and then at the very top it expects a certain number of functions, like you would expect props in a component, and you just tell your return function when somebody hits an endpoint saying, okay, give them back this HTML with all these values. So everything was still server-side rendering, and it sort of just made sense to me because coming from a background of looking at HTML, CSS, and JS separate, having them separate still but dynamic made a lot of sense, and things were easier to plug and play around. It's the same reason I enjoyed Hugo over Gatsby, because I see a bunch of HTML that makes sense to me. I update certain variables, it runs through some sort of a transpiler, it replaces the value, and then it displays. That's essentially what I ended up doing with Vue. So Vue has two files instead of a spec file and another file and another file. Vue just has two files. One of them is vue.js, and then you have your .js file with the JavaScript code. And then, vue.vs, whatever the Vue extension is. So those files have HTML on top, that's just pure HTML, and then you reference them by the whatever the class name is and some variables in there on the bottom with the JavaScript that renders it. And then any other functions or data or anything you need to run lives in its subsequent JS file. So you look at the JS file, and in my head, I map them out as the JS file is the Python function doing everything, and then the Vue file is the HTML file with the variables. But it's a little bit more cleaner because I don't have to write any real backend code, and the JavaScript I do write is more or less just get values, transform them into proper things, and display them.
Mm-hmm.
And it just makes sense. It's one of those things where I just look at it and it's like, I understand. I don't feel dumb looking at front end anymore. And that's huge empowerment because I can look at a code base and start editing it right away if it's properly modeled. And in Vue, they do make sure you properly are distributing it. I mean, I guess that's with any properly architected code. As long as you make sure each one of your screens or components are in their subsequent folders, everything's separated. It's easier to find code where to edit, where to not. And yeah, I picked up this Elastic Vue project like 2 days ago, and I've already pretty much taken out most of the functionality and replaced it with some of the things I want to do. And it took me like 2 days. If I had to start from scratch, it probably would have taken me an entire sprint to even start off with something very basic with React and then adding a little table. And I would have been probably ashamed of how I've structured the directories and the libraries, and I would have never shown you that code because you would have looked at it and said, do better. And yeah. So
Yes.
it made me really happy because everything from, as a person who's aggressively backend slash DevOps, who does not see the front end or templating languages very much, um, it just makes sense. It looks a lot more, yeah, it's easier to pick up for me at least.
Hmm. Yeah, I think one of the things that stands out there too is the amount that you can keep your JavaScript on the front end doing essentially a couple things, which is like replacing variables, handling on clicks, and conditionally rendering. If you can limit it to those things as much as possible, you're going to simplify your application. And then if you can figure out how to push other stuff away, that tends to keep things reasonable. And it sounds like from what you've said there, Vue does a really good job of saying that's where these things go. If you want a little bit of functionality, a little bit of interactivity, you want some variable injection, put that here, and then it'll be used over here.
Exactly.
Cool.
And I think it also was a little bit easier for me to understand because the store system in it was a little complicated, but because I was very familiar with Redux, it was easier for me to look at it and say, okay, this is how the state changes and state management happens and variables are thrown away from all over the place. But like we've talked in a previous podcast, if it did a really good job of processing till the end, like it seemed to not worry about data manipulation all over the place. It was basically, this is what I need to show. These are the things I need to plug in to show it better. And this is some of the computing I need to do in order to make that happen. And it was good because on simpler pages, there was no JS file. It was a normal HTML and you could pass it the value and it would just run whatever it needs to do to show values. And yeah, simple, clean, everything in one file.
Have you worked with the view model, or sorry, the V model attribute at all? Because that, at least,
I want to say yes.
as far as
it seems like something I've seen today.
because if I'm understanding it correctly, that's the thing that allows two-way data binding, where you can essentially say, this represents this piece of data. And then if, for example, this input changes, it'll change that data. And if that data changes, it'll change that input.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm
definitely.
curious if you've seen that, because the concern I would have coming from a React context is, well, how do you keep that from being a problem? But if it's just not, I'd like to know why it's not a problem in Vue.
I don't know if I would run into that problem. I did see it. It
Yeah.
was very much just a normal syntax of getters and setters. And every time I would look at a data field that would need updating if I needed to make it, whenever you would do any change, on change, you just call the setter kind of thing. But this application that I'm developing is very much a search the logs and display the logs, not touch the logs.
I see.
So I ended up removing all the setters and cleaned up the code so that nobody even accidentally hits an endpoint
Right.
that deletes the index in our production Elasticsearch.
Right. So how to deal with two-way data binding? Just remove the other half.
Exactly. One-way data, it just makes sense. Everything flows one way.
So
Unless
this is one of the things I like about React in the way that I think. It's also the one I'm most familiar with, so I will be biased to it. But because components are just functions, and that I know the data flows one way through the application, anytime I get into a place where I'm struggling to figure out how to implement something or I'm trying to fix a bug, I can take a step back and say, these are just functions that that get things and return things. And so if I'm having some sort of stateful issue, I just need to step back and say, what happens every time this function's called? And that's all that's ever going to happen. So if you're using something like a useState hook, you're like, it's going to be whatever it was last time, and whatever you've updated to this time is going to generate a new iteration of that function, and it just can receive those values and render them. So if you can't understand what's going on, you've got a problem with a mental model of your application, which is one of the things I like about not having class components, because they were hard to understand that. But having this one-way data flow through the application, passing through functions, it means that if you have a strong background in JavaScript, which is where I came to React from, then you can think about it as JavaScript as opposed to when I look at something like Angular, I have to know or I can tell that I have to know what Angular is doing versus React looks just like I have to understand what JavaScript is doing. And I remember a conversation you and I had where you were like, I don't understand what this is doing. I was like, it just functions. And you were like, oh yeah, right, it's just functions. And that just clicked and you're like, I feel dumb. But that's all it is. At the end of the day, React is just returning JSX and it happens to do something special with those things. But if you just think of them as return values, it's just one big composed function that happens to generate your application. So it's a good mental model that I find easy to understand. But if your brain doesn't work that way, then maybe there's a different framework that will make more sense to you. And at the end of the day, unless you're being paid to work on it, you may as well work with the one that you prefer.
Yeah, exactly. And in this case, I'm actually being paid to work on it.
Even better, because
So
you got
I'm
you
enjoying
got to
it.
choose.
Yeah. And yeah, I did, even though I removed all the setters and everything, I didn't play around too much with the store. But in my mental model, the way I thought of React Redux was Redux is the database you read from, it's a local database you read from, and then anytime you need to make a change, you make it to the primary, and then you fetch from the primary again to update the local database, and you always read from it. So there was still at least a one-way flow of data, and that's at least from the code. While I was skimming the code, while I was aggressively killing it with the machete this morning, that's how it seemed to me, at least however the guy had set up. It wasn't like it was updating the store and then the store was updating the API or something. It was you update the store to read, and then anytime a change happens on the front end, you hit the API endpoints to like actually update, and then those will trigger an event to update the store again. And at least that was still a good cyclic one way
Mhm.
for me. Maybe it does support two-way data binding on that end of your local database is the copy, and whatever this reflects is what the server must. But I haven't played around with it enough to get confused with two-way data binding yet.
Sure.
I know I looked at it in Angular, and I went out of my way to avoid it, to make sure updates were happening in certain points, and you can track how the code is going places.
Yeah. I don't think I mentioned it since we started the episode. So just to be clear, a few years ago, I did maintain a AngularJS application for work. And so I have those haunting memories. And I know that Angular is better now. I know Angular 2 was a big step, and whatever Angular 98 or whatever they're on now, I know that it's probably better. But when I pull up the Hello World and it looks bad, and I remember all the $ scopes that I had to deal with and try to figure out what was inheriting from what and how I got this context to here and why I can't render this button that doesn't exist because it's a class that inherits from a class that inherits from a class. It's not something I miss, and I am going to hold that grudge until someone proves me otherwise. And unfortunately, for any Angular fans out there, Gyan doesn't seem to disagree. So he's on the Vue train, and I guess I'm still on the React train.
Yeah, and if you're on the Angular train, F in the chat, boys.
Rip.
Rip. Yeah, come at us. Hit us up on Twitter. Please show us the proper, nice way to do Angular so we can probably learn. And if we still find it bad, then we will respond back with a heart emoji or something for your pain and the suffering you've been through.
Yeah. Empathy.
Empathy, yeah. It's one of our core values on this podcast.
That's right. It's really important to me.
Yeah, right next to humility.
Do you have anything else for Vue?
Yeah, well, not Vue, but like a point that I had for just distinction between the three, at least from what I searched at as it stands right now, a big plus that React had was React Native, in my opinion, to create mobile apps, because you want to support all the screens that you can put your application on, and Angular didn't seem to have that many support for it. For Vue, I did see they have native script that has decent Vue documentation that you can And I think NativeScript just supports any JS, so in theory you could probably just write Angular for it. Um, Transpile all your TS into JS that goes into native code somehow. Um, it's an old language. I'm sure people have figured out how to make apps out of it, but it might not be the easiest or friendliest way of making apps. At that point, you might as well just learn Kotlin and Swift and just go the native route.
Sure.
Yeah.
If
Anything on your list for these three wonderful languages? Or one wonderful language, one okay, and one F.
uh, I mean, not really. I can always just talk about opinions on how people do
Oh,
React,
actually,
but
I have not researched into this or known much about this. If you have any idea about testing in the three frameworks,
mm. So I don't have a ton of experience with testing. The reason being,
nobody needs to test.
the reason being, I seem to be the only person that likes snapshot testing that I've ever met. Not that I've met a lot of people, but I seem to be the only one that likes it. So that's my personal preference right now, at least. And so for those who don't know, snapshot testing it generates the, I'll start over. You pass in the props and state that you would want to your component and then take a snapshot of it. So this is for React. And what you're able to do then is commit those snapshots to your version control. And if you're working in component A and its snapshots change, you say, does this component do what I think it's supposed to do now? Yes, it looks right. When I look in the browser and I use it, it seems to do what I want it to do. I will update those snapshots. But if at the same time, component B's snapshots changed, you go, I didn't touch component B. That's not good. And then you have to figure out why your changes change component B. And then that tells you I should go look at it, see what it's doing now. And if you realize, oh, all it was I changed this from being this value optionally, meaning this or undefined, to this or undefined or null, and you go, it's fine. It still does the same thing. The null case is handled the same as the undefined. We're good. I'll push those snapshots up. Everything's all right. And so what it does, in my mind at least, is taps you on the shoulder and says, this changed. Did you mean for it to change? And make sure that you look at it. It's kind of like everything good you get from WebDriver, Selenium type testing, browser-based tests, without everything horrible about those, in that they're slow and they break and they most of the time fail for no reason. And when the tests fail, your gut reaction is not to say, oh, I wonder what broke, to why did the test fail? Because it's almost never, to the point where it may as well be never, that something actually regressed. Your form still submits, you can go use it. The problem is you updated a minor version of one of your form component libraries, and now it renders differently. So you can't click it the same way, and you can see it, but it's covered by an invisible block that you can't click through, so it doesn't work. So snapshot testing is the way to go. Browser testing is dumb. I wish it were good, but it's not. And I think people do model-based testing, but I don't really know about that. It's basically like unit tests for front end, but typically there's not so much logic in the front end that I would write a lot of unit tests for it, because it's largely just filtering things and stuff. So like if you get everything from the database, and you want it all, but you sometimes only want to show the active ones, for example, you'll have a little utility that'll just filter out the inactive ones. Like if you want to unit test that, sure, but that's kind of the extent of logic I typically see. And the other thing would be if you're using something like Storybook, that is a cool way of isolating sort of the presentation of a component, and you can more or less manually QA it in a isolated environment. And so that can be pretty cool, but I have not worked with it extensively. I just used it the one time, or I guess the couple times I contributed to a Spotify code base, and
Show off.
yeah, I know. And it was cool, but we have it at work and we don't use it, so I can't really speak to it too deeply. What about
All
you?
right.
Do you have anything for front end
No,
testing?
nah, man. My front end testing chops are making sure the unstable Selenium tests run as stable as possible
Just add more,
from
add more
infrastructure
weight,
perspective.
add more weight force.
Add more weight. That's the solution. That's what I've learned on every single Selenium test I've
Uh,
ever fixed. Just wait for the component to render. That's it.
so bad.
Um, yeah, or use proper drivers, or make sure your container actually spins up. Besides that, it's in God's hand. You have done everything a human can do,
Yeah.
and now it's up to Chromium gods to make sure things open up, run in a headless way, and
I
I
would.
don't know. Maybe we wait till we've virtualized a human that can actually like click in a headless way and be like, yeah, this makes sense. I'm doing that because I figure it's a small, tiny human.
Yeah, yeah, they would sound like that.
Of course they would, yeah.
Uh, but I will say though, as far as browser-based tests go, because you probably will need to write a couple of them, Cypress is actually pretty good. It's the one that we're using at the company I'm at right now. And as far as limited frustration and pain with writing them, maintaining them still a pain. It always will be. But writing them initially, it's been pretty good. And the UI is quite nice with it. It shows a nice directory of all your tests, and you can click through them and run them one at a time or in a group. And gives you nice printouts to the console so you can travel through the different states of your test. So it'll be like before you submitted your, and then when you got your stub response back, after you submitted, you can toggle between those, see what your UI is doing. You can inspect the UI while it's running. These sorts of things that you don't get to do with all frameworks that run browser-based tests. So if you are trying to pick one of ones that I've used, Cypress seems to be a good one. But yeah, just try to talk your team out of it is my advice.
All right. Who needs QA, right?
No, QA is really important.
I know.
Browser-based testing, on the other hand, I think is literally spending time to give yourself tech debt. You're like, this stuff's going to be a pain to maintain. Let's keep writing it. We'll put 2 hours into writing these tests and then 48 hours into maintaining that one test without ever doing like a dependency upgrade or anything. It just happens to break for some reason. And we'll spend hours and hours maintaining it in the hope that it'll be useful when we go to do a dependency upgrade, which we have to manually QA anyway. So it makes no sense.
I know. I've spent those hours and hours fixing them.
I hope everybody at home
Literally?
understands how I feel about this.
I think they do.
Good.
I think they do.
Good. Sorry I could
Well,
cut off
we'll
your...
do one for just automated browser testing.
Oof. It'd just be an angry hour of me. Yeah. Sorry.
I think that's what's going to be the highlight of this podcast series. People are just going to be like, we need more angry Nathan.
Well, they'd be the first to recommend it. I will say sorry I cut off your Chris Traeger there. It was.
Oh no, that's okay.
I heard it was coming, but the delay was a bit too much, and I was already talking.
That's okay. It'll literally come back in a different way.
Perfect. So I guess that wraps it up for what I have. Do you have anything
Yeah,
else?
me too.
Cool.
No.
So
You want to move on to the next awesome section?
that's right. Yeah, I need to know what you're gonna, how you did as far as doing better, and how you're gonna continue to do better next week.
Did better .tld pending, and we're gonna do better. Okay. Did better. I said I would start. I don't know if it was last week I said I would start or the week before, but I've been reading the book, the other one that I finally now know the name
Okay.
of, so you don't have to be in suspense. It's David and Goliath.
Okay, I haven't heard of that one.
It's a little nicer than the other one. It still follows the same Malcolm Gladwell writing style of, here's my point, here's 10 studies proving my point. And in between study 6, study 5 will be referenced, study 4 will be referenced, and it just keeps going back and forth. But it's nice. It's the last one was very much focused on how everybody who ever did great in life, all the billionaires and riches, did because of either some weird thing in the system or because they got lucky. And then at the very end, it wraps up, which I was hoping would come, was, well, yes, they had the opportunity, but they got better because they actually used those. Lots of people in their age group also had the same opportunity, but they did not go for them. And that's why they sucked and why Bill Gates is Bill Gates. So at least that gave me a little bit of hope of, as long as I keep looking for opportunities and not saying no to most things, things will happen, as we've seen in that movie with the guy in the mask. I already forgot his name.
Batman?
The guy who did the mask. The famous guy, the famous comedian. He did the movie Yes Man.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about, but I've actually never
Yeah.
watched The Mask, so.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Is
You
that a
gotta do
Jim
better.
Carrey one?
Yes, Jim Carrey. Thank you. So he's the one who did that, and it's a great movie. But saying yes, it's comedy, but I think it applies to real life to some extent.
Okay.
But yes, David and Goliath is very much so far, at least, about how certain things or assumptions that you make about certain things are better aren't actually always, and why certain things that look like they should be worse are actually not. So, good little distinction of understanding everything is not how it seems. Like Howard isn't the best choice for you if there's certain other factors in play.
Okay, yeah, I was about to ask for an example, so.
Yeah, that's very much it. It's like, hey, there's this person who has certain education and certain interests. Which college should they pick? This great one where they may feel like shit, or this average one where they may still excel, and then in later on life, both people end up doing pretty much the same
Mhm.
in life, kind of thing. Um, where, like, I don't know, 4 years ago, I would have been like, oh, that's bullcrap. You have to go to the best schools. And, now I'm 25, I have no degree, but I'm still doing pretty great. So I feel good about this. Yeah, so the book is pretty cool. I'm reading it. Another thing I said I would do better on was continue working on the Slack bot I was working on and get it live. So I did host it on a server, running into some issues, as always with deploys. I think the problem here is just me being cheap, so I'll just allocate more resources to it. And yeah, I'm hoping this weekend is when this month ends, so I can have a beta release of Winston is live. Go download it, play with it. I I don't have anything on the actual URL, but when I do, I will make sure to update the show notes with it, so that our one listener can go click on it and check it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's all on Did Better. For doing better, I'm gonna continue reading. I'm gonna make sure David and Goliath is finished by the end of the month, so that I can enter February with a new book. And yeah, I've started playing Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Pretty fun so far. Little little less engaging than I had hoped. The story isn't really captivating me. I just used to play Tomb Raider always because I loved the game and the hair looked amazing. Um, but now there's other factors like story and my tastes have developed more, so now I'm having a harder time. But good so far. And then yeah, as I said already, I will do the beta launch. I will try my hardest. I will not be shaming myself if I didn't do it, but I will try.
If I were a few weeks ahead, I would tell you to just consult your solutions architect friend, but I haven't done that yet, so
That's true.
soon.
I soon, because then you'll get a bunch of like AWS credits too
Ooh,
once you do that course and stuff, and then you can host the infrastructure for the next big do better idea.
there you go.
Yeah,
See, this is how the rich get richer.
exactly.
So I wasn't going to mention this one, but since you mentioned video games, I'm just going to bring up. I said I was playing Outer Worlds. I think I mentioned this on an episode.
What happened to Rocket League?
So Rocket League's still a thing, and I will mention that.
Okay. Okay.
I was playing Outer Worlds before I got addicted to Rocket League. I played Outer Worlds for like 2 days, and then I played Rocket League for 2.5, 3 weeks, whatever it's been. And I went to play Outer Worlds again this past weekend, and it's so boring. I could not believe how bored I was. I literally looked at my companion in the game and just said to her, I was like, Parvati, your game's so boring. So I don't think I'm gonna keep playing Outer Worlds. I'm gonna try getting back into it a little bit, but for whatever reason, I'm just not connecting with it, which is weird because it's as far as I can tell, a mostly open world RPG in space, which is pretty much all I should need. Those are like the three things I love. So I thought this is going to be great, but it's just, I don't know, a bit slow. But as far as Rocket League goes, yeah, I'm on a hot streak of doing horribly. So I was doing pretty well, and then I had a night where I just decided to play for a bit before bed, and I was really good. But I didn't want to try to play right before bed and get all fired up and then try to sleep. So I just did training, but I was practicing the shots and they were going really well. And then I went to play the next morning feeling good and did some warm up, did some casual games, and then I went to ranked and I was absolutely the sole reason our team lost. Like I was in the wrong place constantly and I felt like I almost felt like I should leave the match to save my teammates because I'm like, they might win if I just leave. So that wasn't so good. But I've just decided I'm going to keep playing casual until I'm through this phase of doing horribly. And then once I'm through that phase, I'll go back into ranked because I just feel bad for other people when I show up and I'm just really bad. But I wasn't actually meant to talk about video games this whole time. The things that I did better from were I did stick to my body weight goal, so I didn't cut back on my food. But I'm looking forward to it. This is the first time in years I can remember actually looking forward to the end of a weight gain phase for the benefit of not having to eat so much. And because normally what I do is I just up my fats and they're really easy to eat. But I went with carbs this time, which is really filling. So I'm just like, I have to eat early enough that I don't go to bed feeling really full. Because I think if you lie down with a bunch of rice in your gut, you're just like, this feels gross. So I'm looking forward to not having to worry about that anymore. And I'm doing one more week of more or less maintenance. And then February, when I go climbing, I'll start cutting down, which will be great. So I did that. I did look at the Do Better Club website theme, like I said I would. And that was a bit of a rabbit hole, but we got it done. And kept working on the AWS course. But this is a big commitment, so I'm going to do it. The big thing I need to do for, if this one's before the end of March, I would like to, this is super lame, the fact that that this is a thing I can say I need to do better on. But I have so many things I own that need to be replaced. I have, like, most of my clothes have holes in it. I have bags with holes in them. My glasses are so scratched that I'm just choosing not to wear them on this call because it's hard to look through them. I have all these things that by the end of March, I just need to no longer own and wear things with holes in them. I've replaced, since realizing this on Friday, I've replaced my socks. So I no longer have socks with holes in them. But I'm wearing shoes right now with holes in the tops and holes on the bottoms. And
I can't believe this is a first world problem for a well-paid software developer.
yes. And yeah, so just as a general rule, walking around at any given time, I would have had holes in my shoes, holes in my socks, holes in my joggers that I wear around the house, but not holes in my joggers I wear out. This shirt's fairly new, but it was secondhand, so there's a button missing, but that's okay. And so I'm not counting that. The drawstring bag I wear to the gym, that has a big hole in it. The zipper on my coat doesn't work, so I can't zip up one of my pockets. And my glasses, I guess, is the other big thing. So I've got a bunch of stuff I need to replace anyway. And I haven't done it because it's one of those things that my general approach to buying stuff is, well, if I didn't need it today, why would I need it tomorrow? And I get stuck in this situation where now I own stuff I should have replaced 2 years ago. And when you don't have a lady in your life to look at your shoes and say, I can see your socks through your shoes, and you don't have coworkers who are also female to say, oh, you're wearing different socks today, which is how I knew I need to replace my shoes last time, then you don't really think about it. You just live by yourself in a lockdown, and you get in that situation. But realized, yeah, after the chat about getting a haircut and feeling better, I went, you know what? This is long overdue. I'm probably going to feel a whole lot better if I have stuff that isn't in need of being replaced. So for the end of March, that's the goal.
Yeah, like not even screw even the pants. Get better glasses. You need them to see.
And you know what's bad about that? So this is the thing. I even have benefits that will cover these lens replacements.
Yes.
So I need to replace these.
You're in this recursive loop with no exit condition.
That
If
is
I didn't need it yesterday, why would I need it today? Then today becomes yesterday, and then
Correct.
it just happens over and over.
there is no base case, which is how I have basically no soul left in my shoe.
You're gonna be OOM very soon if you don't do something about
Yeah,
it.
it's just a big old stack. So yes, I'm basically trying to think if I were to run into someone on the street I was trying to impress, what would I want to be wearing? And a lot of the time, it's not what I'm currently wearing. So I want that to no longer be the case. But it's going to take a
But
bit
you're
of time.
shredding, so if you do it right, you don't have to wear anything when you run into them.
I suppose that would be ideal conditions. I don't know that I can make that happen before the end of March, though.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So in the
I look
meantime,
forward to it.
I'll get
In
better.
the meantime.
I'll get better shoes.
Okay. See, because I'm accepting of everything, I am like, okay, that's a legit do better goal, but my rational brain is just like, that's just living, man. Just do better. You shouldn't need a resolution to buy glasses to see properly.
So when I told you about this, and I told you it was going to be disappointing, I was like, he has no idea. He has no idea how lame this is going to be.
Well, everybody check back by March, because is Nathan okay? If I can make a website called isnathanok.com where he just DM him.
This is perfect. By the day that this goes live, because it'll be the last week of March, it should be March 27th, I think. Or no, 29th, because I'm pretty sure the last episode that I scheduled was on the 22nd. So it should be that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is March 29th.
March 29th. By the time this episode goes out, I should be looking dapper, wearing much better clothes, and feeling good, hopefully.
Yeah, so there you go, folks.
Being a grown adult.
Yeah, when you listen to this, in addition to now knowing perfectly which front-end framework you need to use, please hit us up on social media so that we can verify that Nathan actually has new clothes and glasses.
This is perfect, because this goes out, and then immediately when people find out about it, I can be not a problem anymore. So they can't even get mad at me. So as soon as they find out, I've already fixed it.
We need a before and after.
Yeah, maybe I'll just record the various things I replace.
We're gonna need to start vlogging. So the 3 people who listen to this are gonna need us to put more content out.
That's right, yeah. Well, so far, for all those wondering at home, I've thrown out 4 pairs of socks that had essentially no bottom. They were kind of just like covers for my feet.
Damn. Okay. Well, I'm gonna say that this is where we stop.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. So do better on that.
Yes.
I look forward to it. I will probably be checking in with you a lot more than I currently do, because I'm concerned.
No, it's fine.
But yeah, anything else you want to do better on that's not quite as concerning?
Well, no. Really, just going to keep doing the AWS course. Keep playing Rocket League. The stuff I keep talking about.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, anybody, for listening to this. Hit us up on social media for anything you found amusing on this episode, or for ideas for what else you would like us to talk about or cover for tech stuff.
And why we're wrong about Angular.
That's true. Yeah, prove us wrong about Angular. That actually would make me happy.
Cool.
Well, yeah. Bye.